Assalamualaikum everyone. Thank you for joining in. It's 6:05 now, so it's our central time. So we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Zahra. I'm the current chair of MSA National, and with Maristan, we're doing a healing circle today for our students. We're welcomed with our guest speakers, Dr. Rania, Zahra, Billoo, and Dr. Hatem, Bazian. Next slide, please. So Maristan is an organization grounded in Islamic traditions. It aims to lead professional clinical care, education, and research in advancing holistic and mental, spiritual wellness. MSA National is a unifying movement rooted in our deen of all Muslim student associations. And last we counted, we had about 650 across the 50 states in Canada. Cultivating safe and transformative spaces for all Muslims on campus and continuing to serve the Ummah beyond graduation. So just a few rules for the Healing Circle agreement for those who are in the chat, and feel free to use the Q&A feature of the Zoom whenever you feel like adding a comment or asking a question of our speakers. But just wanted to share with everyone, this is a safe space. The microphone segment won't be recorded. Please be mindful of what is said. Share your name if you choose to and are comfortable. Please keep all comments relevant, comments short, and please no disrespect. So I'm sure we all have seen what's happening across the different universities for Gaza and the student encampments that have been supporting the Gaza movement. So across the United States and now all over the world, actually, universities are enacting censorship and oppression tactics to suppress the voices of student organizations and organizers, calling for an end to the university complicity in the occupation of Palestine and the ongoing US-backed genocide of Gaza. While the entire academic system in Gaza has undergone destruction by the Zionist entity, universities is in the belly of the beast continue to choose to profit over these lies of the Palestinian people and the demands of their own students. The call for the People's University of Gaza is a call to take back our universities from the hands and interests of Zionism. As we continue to build people power amongst our campuses and local communities, the student movement only grows stronger and more powerful than the imperial forces working to suppress us. So I'd like to take a quick second to introduce our speakers. The person you see driving is Dr. Hatem Bazian. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Hatem.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for joining us. I'll just do a quick bio read for those who are attending. So he's a co-founder and professor of Islamic law and theology at Zaytuna College and the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college. He's a professor in departments of Near Eastern and Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He's the advisor of Religion, Politics, and Globalization Center in the University of California, Berkeley. He is the founder of the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project at the Center of Race and Genders at USC Berkeley. And he's also the executive director of the Islamophobia Studies Journal. Next, we have.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna go through all this speaker bios, inshallah, and then we'll give you the floor, inshallah.
Go ahead.
Okay, we have also Zahra Billoo, who is a civil rights attorney. She was the executive director of CAIR San Francisco Bay Area, one of the largest care offices in the country. She's a fellow with the Levi Strauss Foundation Pioneers in Justice. She's a senior fellow with the American Leadership Forum Silicon Valley chapter, alumna of the Rockwood's Fellowship of Berkeley, California, Leader Springs Executive Directors Fellowship, and USC's American Muslim Civil Leadership Institute. And she was also awarded the 2017 Human Rights Award from the Society of American Law Teachers and the 2018 award from the People Acting in Community Together. MashaAllah, very stacked bios. And then finally, we have Dr. Zainab Hoseini. She's a clinical social worker, postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford Department of Psychology and the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. She's a licensed mental health clinician and practices at the El Camino Women's Medical Group. Her research focuses on building cultural relevance and trauma-informed mental health care programs for youth impacted by emergency, specifically refugees. And she has led the refugee and global mental health team at the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab at Stanford. Lots of great California people here. I myself am from Houston, so little bites. We have great people. So the objectives of today are to address the violent response of the law enforcement against student encampments for Gaza, provide information on legal tools and resources for students and community workers, give religious guidance on how to remain steadfast during these difficulties, and provide ways we can tangibly support our students at the forefront, and of course, make the community dua at the end. So that was my introduction and the background of today's session. We'll go ahead and move forward with Dr. Hatem Bazian, and you have the floor.
جزاكم الله خير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Just the context of where I am. I'm driving down to UC San Diego, and I have a lecture in there at 6 p.m. and I'm on the 405, hoping to get there a little bit before the lecture. So I'm on the road. I'm gonna see if I'm able to come down. But last week I was also out to the East Coast. I went to University of Pennsylvania, Rutgers. Also did the Jum'ah khutbah for the Columbia University MSA, and toured some of the places in New Jersey, and then also have covered most of the Northern California students in camp. So what I want to say, well, one is that we need actually to celebrate, but also really recognize that the Muslim students have been present across the nation in almost every encampment. And I actually said that if the 1960s civil rights movement had the leadership of the Black churches centering the political movement, and during the Vietnam War, we had the Buddhist tradition that was at the center of political movements in terms of people recognizing and engaging with Buddhism. I think it would be fair to say that in this moment, the Muslim students and Islam is at the center of the current political mobilization, with the space opening, which is also taking place in partnership and recognition of progressive Jewish voices, in particular Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now others. So that's really in the contribution and the impact of our Muslim students across college campuses, and also the fact that our community mobilized to give them the support. And I would definitely say that the work of CAIR has been tremendous, and recognizing the work of Zahra and her contribution in the mobilization, in making sure that everybody is actually responding to all kinds of action alert. And then nationally, CAIR has partnered with both the student level, but also with American Muslims for Palestine. And I think this space being opened up by Dr. Rania Awad and Maristan is also a very important way to recognize that the community is responding to the current period. It's a period of crisis, but also it's a period of emerging types of leadership that is directly connected to the needs, to the requirements of our community on the ground. The repression and uh, response to encampment and the police response to organizing for Palestine. Anyone that had a sense of history of policing and history of repression recognizes that the police repression is always directed at minorities. And the notion of idealizing the society here or idealizing certain centers of power, I think for Muslims in particular, the immigrant part of it has been misplaced idealization or the lack of recognition, lack of historical context. I always say that people read Malcolm X, but don't read the specific of what repression Malcolm X and the Black community has faced and continue to face. And you could draw a straight line from the era of Malcolm X and the civil rights movement all the way to George Floyd. On a weekly basis, there are two Black brothers and sisters of ours, brothers and sisters in humanity, that get killed by the police. And then not being aware of this gives us the false impression that somehow is the police is situated to provide safety and security for us with darker complexion or those who identify with the global South. So the repression is a direct outcome of a long history that we need to confront it ourselves and also to have a different sense of what history means in the contemporary period. The second part of this, especially post 9/11, many of these police forces and departments have been trained in Israel or been sent into delegation to be trained in Israel. And it's not coincidental that in the assault at UCLA, there's this person by, I think his name, Aaron Cohen, who actually infiltrated the encampment dressed as Muslim and trying to actually be part of this counterintelligence operation, which coordinated with the LAPD. And the Los Angeles Police Department have participated in the ADL police exchange program, having been sent to Israel to get their training, which is not unique, but actually the normative practices for many of the police departments. So I would counsel those of us who are actually active on campuses and so on to actually be doubly cautious on the one hand of infiltrators, but also that the police departments in general have not been friendly or are situated to be friendly to the Muslim community, considering that they have internalized Islamophobia, because when the training they get is heavily rooted in what I call Islamophobic social imaginary, pushed forth by training in Israel, but also pushed forward by all those who claim to be experts on the theories of countering violent extremism, which all these theories are part of junk science. They don't belong in any type of reputable type of training. So that's what we're seeing. We saw in UCLA, we saw it in Emory University, Washington University. The attack on Columbia University shows also the internal coordination and the almost security partnership between local police and also segments of security apparatus coming out from Israel. So that's for us to understand how Islamophobia, anti-Muslim racism, and also anti-Palestinian racism actually seeps into the police forces, and also is shaped by the various university administrators who likewise actually get to training in Israel, and also have extensive partnership. I often say university administration acts as if it is a desk in the State Department, and more often than not, the university administrators have regular meetings with the academic attaché at the Israeli consulates across the country, and then the ADL directors locally and nationally are on a first name basis with many of these university administrators. So just to be aware of the landscape, because often the departments they send or stick onto the students, the diversity, equity, and inclusion often is a person of color. Sometimes they might hire a person who speaks Arabic or appears to be of Islam, Muslim or Arab background, but in reality, they are still seeped into seeing the Muslims, the Arab, the pro-Palestinian as a problem that needs to be managed, and they respond to the pressure, to the demand that is coming from Israel, and that's this whole dubious claim of campus climate. This campus climate theme literally was structured around Palestine protests on college campuses, beginning actually in response to UC Berkeley students who took over a building back in 2011. And from that point, this notion of campus climate that began to have a research with putting a survey that had no scientific rigor or accuracy to it, listening sessions, and that rolled into this theme of countering or creating and attending to campus climates. All was structured around responding to Zionist claims of feeling unsafe. And now we see the full thrust of it that became nationally adopted as a legislative measure in Congress, and the media is literally going out to the pastures with this claim, and it's very important, it's strategically deployed, because campus safety is managed through a different set of regulations than the notions of free speech and academic freedom, which are subject to time, place, and manner, and so on. So literally to claim that pro-Palestine speech and activity is not really free speech, but rather it's an issue of public safety and well-being. And that's what you're seeing, and it's the direct outcome of this strategy that has been stitched in 2011, because they know they cannot actually win on the merits of free speech and academic freedom. So tethering their arguments and their discourse on campus safety and well-being, because there is a whole set of regulations that apply in there. So I want to say that we do have resources, and I would encourage you, again, Maristan is a great organization that has our trust and support. CAIR is great in there, both for reporting as well as their legal team that is on the front of many of the activities. You could also reach to us, MLFA, Muslim Legal Fund of America, which is also I'm chairing, and then AMP, American Muslims for Palestine. All these organizations are working. And then also you have Palestine Legal. We're all trying to confront and counter the avalanche that is being directed at all of us to silence our ability to speak on Palestine at this point. So I welcome all your questions and all your concerns, and you could always reach out to me directly on my at my UC Berkeley email, hatemb@berkeley.edu. So jazakumullah khair, and thank you for listening to my comments.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Hatem. If anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A filter or chat feature, and inshallah we'll get those answered at the end. Next we have Zahra Billoo from CAIR San Francisco Bay Area.
Alaikum. It is so good to see all of you. A little worried about Dr. Hatem driving and doing a webinar, but mashallah, 2 steps ahead of us. Like him, I am between campuses, so I just left the UC Berkeley encampment and I'm headed to the San Jose State sit-in. Thank you, MSA National and Maristan, for coordinating us there. The topic I was asked to speak about was legal rights and resources, and that's been honestly a really challenging topic in these last several months because the law has not been on our side in many cases, and there is a question of like, what can I do, what is legal, as well as for those who want to believe in law and order, a sense of incredible disappointment around, of course, what we're seeing our government fund in Palestine, but also how every elected official that we trusted, that we knew, that we thought would listen to us, that we thought was on the, that they showed up to Rome cars and they took their shoes off and pictures, and so they would do the right thing if they haven't. And so the law has been a really frustrating area to talk about and work in recent months. To give you a sense of what this looks like in terms of issues across the country, has documented in the last year a 30-year high in reports of animals and Palestinian incidents. The bulk of that, of course, happened following the onset of the Israeli genocide in Gaza in October 2023. We have had literally thousands of complaints come through our doors in the last 7 months, and they have ranged from employment discrimination, either because people talked about Palestine at work, or in the worst case scenario, posted about Palestine on their personal social media, and their employers took issue with even that. We received complaints of school bullying and harassment. Did any of what I said come through earlier? It just kicked me out and brought me back in. Okay. Hate crime one I looked up, right? Somebody, a reporter asked me today, they said, why are you wearing your keffiyeh? And I explained it's both a symbol of solidarity and resistance of our happening in Palestine. Also, there are so many now faced violence because they've worn their keffiyehs in the United States, including of course young men several months ago who were shot while wearing their keffiyehs, who were wearing their keffiyehs. And so the legal landscape has been really challenging. Now, with that really difficult backdrop, I will say that the panel of the students has been so inspiring. What I shared with the UC Berkeley students a little while ago was that there's this Mexican proverb that's been sitting with me, and it's they thought they could bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. And to see what has sprung up after I call it the second, we have a West Coast bias here, because, right, the first encampment for Palestine was actually at Stanford University and lasted 120 days. So the second encampment at Columbia, the police shut that down or tried to shut it down. Right? The university administrators, the police, and pro-Israel groups thought that they could bury us. They didn't know that we were seeds. In the several weeks since the first attacks on Columbia, we've seen over 120 encampments launch across the country and really across the world. Somebody posted on social media, they said Antarctica is the only continent that doesn't have an encampment. And you better believe that within 2 days, the encampment came up in Antarctica. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so the video is a bit delayed, but as long as the sound is coming through, I'll do my best with what I have. In addition to the over 120 encampments, there are countless campuses that have activities that are not encampments. They are rallies every day, they are sit-ins, they are BDS resolutions. And so there's been just this incomparable at campuses and an unprecedented amount of violence from university administrators, pro-Israel agitators, and police. Over 2,500 students have been arrested. Now, they're not all Muslim, and this is a really inspiring point that you likely know if you've been to an encampment. They're not all Muslim. In fact, I would say more than 50% are not Muslim in some cases. And these arrests are continuing, and students keep coming back, which has been so powerful because they're unafraid. There's also been a lot of violence, right? right? Mostly by pro-Israel and police. I actually entirely by pro-Israel groups and police. We saw our own dose of this on the West Coast in the last week with attacks on USC, attacks on UCLA, and arrests at those two campuses, as well as UC San Diego. And still, thing that I've heard from people in those cities where is students are being released from the hospital, going right back to the encampment to do absolutely what's necessary to advocate for Palestine. Your legal rights amid all of this. You have the right to protest. You have the right to speak out. You may or may not have the right to set up a camp or tent on your campus. The other reason I struggle with all of this is because civil disobedience requires breaking the law, right? It's choosing strategically which laws to break, how to have the most impact, to move public opinion, and to bring other people into the movement. You have the right to speak. You have the right to protest. Most protests do not require permits. And this is something that I think a lot of students get stuck on. I need to get permission to protest. No, in most cases, you do not. Obviously, check your university regulations and your city regulations. But the most that we have seen around regulations to protest is things like amplified sound. Amplified sound is not your loud chanting. It's a whole plugged-in speaker system. That's just not getting a protest started. Now, getting an encampment up, like I said, in many, many cases, probably all, you don't have the right to set up a tent on your campus and keep it there overnight. But that's civil disobedience, right? People have always, in American history, chosen which laws to break for strategic purposes. You have a right to be free and safe wherever.
It looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Yeah, I think Zahra Billoo has dropped off. We'll go ahead and move on to Dr. Zainab Kasani till we can get Dr. Zahra back on, just in the interest of time, inshallah.
Sure. So I'll go ahead and get started. And if she logs back on, do you want to transition back to her or? Oh, I think she's back.
Is that and the is your legal rights and resources.
I don't see nor hear her. Zahra, if you can hear us, we're going to go ahead and move to Dr. Zainab. And
Okay. Just to just to let Zahra know, you were a little bit choppy and we couldn't really hear you. So Nimna suggested that we transition to me, and then after I'm done speaking, then we'll transition back to finish hearing what you were explaining, inshallah, so that we're all on the same page. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you to the organizers for putting this very important and timely meeting together. So I'd like to start us off by taking a moment and asking everybody to take this moment to take literally 60 seconds and think to yourself how grateful we can be at this very moment to be alive at this time, in this space, during the entire creation of time that Allah has created, for us to be alive at this moment, to be living through these events that are happening, and to have the opportunity to be involved. So I'd like to do a very brief gratitude or shukr exercise. And so I'm going to think of and share with you two things that I'm very grateful about, just in terms of this particular moment in time and space, but also encourage you to do the same thing. First things first, I would like to express my gratitude to Allah for all the students who have very bravely and tenaciously stood up to move towards justice and work on bringing us closer to a more just world. I think that's something that is recognizable and something that we really should be giving shukr or be grateful about. And especially particularly give thanks or be grateful about the fact that students and also other university staff have the bravery, but the organizational skills, the all the different skills that have gone into making these movements possible. So let's just be grateful. And I want to encourage you to be grateful for the fact that our students and folks at these universities, whether they're staff or postdocs like myself or other folks, have these skills to be able to organize in this way. Alhamdulillah for that. And secondly, to just give thanks to Allah for being able to be alive at this moment, to see these movements towards justice, and also to have the opportunity in whatever capacity it may be to be a part of these movements in different shapes or forms. Sometimes we may forget that it's important to be giving thanks for these opportunities. So first, I'm going to be speaking with you a little bit about the impact of the violence that's being inflicted on students in different ways. One of the things that's really helpful to think about from a mental health and psychological perspective is that a lot of times when we think about violence, when we think about the impact of trauma, we tend to think about those personal experiences or interpersonal experiences that folks may have with an adverse life experience. So that may be something like something personal that happens to you from another person, from another one individual. There's another, and that kind of trauma in the literature is referred to as personal trauma. But there's a whole other area of literature that talks about a different form of adversity, and those are impersonal forms of trauma or structural violence and traumatic experiences. So structural trauma or structural adversities refers to the kinds of systemic factors that are placed and that are intentionally in place that are meant to marginalize populations, strip them of their access to basic rights, and discriminate against them and inflict violence upon them. But what's different about these is that they may not be just one particular individual, but a set of policies, a set of systemic factors that go hand in hand and play together to create an environment where people do not have their basic access to their psychological needs, like a need for safety, among other basic things that they need. And right now, in this country, there's a long history and a long literature on experiences with structural trauma for different groups of people, like Dr. Bazian was enumerating earlier. And what we're seeing right now in these encampments and in the movement that is happening is not only are there these very direct, personal, like interpersonal experiences with verbal violence, physical violence, intimidation that's taking place, there's also this additional element of this is a systemic thing. Like systemically speaking, some of these policies are in place to marginalize the voices of a particular group of people. And that form of structural violence can be just as impactful on the mental health and psychological functioning of individuals. And a lot of times we forget to take note of that. Right now, what's happening is a very clear example of that being in place. So for folks who are in some shape or form involved in these movements, for some folks who have previously also been exposed to these structural sources of violence, maybe they have engaged with it in the past, maybe they have been impacted by it in the past. The impact of it on their current mental health functioning is that it's re-traumatizing. It's another manifestation of living through those systemic inequities that contributes to it impacting their mental health. I want to also talk about for just a second, for all of the folks out there who may have not been previously as closely aware of how these structural sources of violence are very real, and how these structural sources of violence do in fact exist and do in fact impact our communities. And sometimes that shift in noticing and really like coming across how blatant these sources of violence are can be really uncomfortable, and it can impact our mental health functioning. So if you happen to be among one of those folks who may have not previously been as exposed to or as aware of how salient these structural ways of the way that the system is set in place to inflict these types of violence on you, if you're among one of those groups who wasn't previously aware of this and is now just really like grappling with this, I want us to recognize that that's an uncomfortable place to be in. And it just requires a lot of processing and a lot of accessing services that can support you and be able to accept it and then continue engaging in the advocacy that you're engaging in to stand up against it. So secondly, what I would also like to talk about is thinking about how what can be the effective ways that we can try to cope with this type of systemic violence that is in place, and all the different forms of adversities that we may be exposed to as a result of participating in this type of advocacy. And in the interest of time, I want to point out two specific types of cognitive or thought-based coping that can help with wrapping our heads around what is happening, regulating our emotions, regulating some of the big feelings that we may be having about what's happening, so that in the interest and in the spirit of being able to continue moving forward and working towards justice and striving towards it. So the first thinking-based strategy, or the cognitive type of coping style that I want to just encourage you to reflect on, is that there is almost like a miraculous type of togetherness and collectivism that has happened through this type of advocacy and through these types of movements that is really, really important for us to take note of and recognize. So what we see is that in all sorts of different ways, at Stanford, it may look in one particular way, and that's what I'm most familiar with, but across these schools, in different campuses, it looks different. But folks coming together locally, but also nationally and internationally, the fact that this is a movement that is happening together between groups of people together, where people from all walks of life, different religious backgrounds, different beliefs about different things, are finding commonality and finding a passion, like a passionate commonality in coming together and being together and moving through this process together, is a really important thing to take note of and keep in mind when you feel like you are struggling with the burden that this may be placing on you, or the challenge that this may be posing you. Because sometimes when we think that these are things that are happening to us alone, when we think that we are navigating these challenges alone, it can be additionally burdensome for our psychological functioning. One of the most effective ways that we know we're able to cope with adversities is where we share that load by knowing that we're not the only people who are experiencing that load. This is a shared load. I want to encourage you to recognize, appreciate, and celebrate that togetherness, the fact that this is happening together, as an intentional way of coping with the challenges that may come about. The second thing that I want to emphasize, and the second thought process that I want to emphasize, is similar to the gratitude exercise that I was presenting in the beginning. I think it's really important for us to remember and constantly engage in this act of remembrance, that the fact that this drive for doing something towards making the world a more just place, standing up against oppression, and speaking truth to power and acting in this way is all inside of us for a reason. Allah intentionally created us in ways to care about these, to care about injustices. It could have been a different way, but we were purposefully created to, in this time and space now, to care about injustices in this particular way. So if you are in any shape or form involved in an advocacy, it's really important to appreciate the fact that this time, this space, this particular whatever action or behavior or movement it is that you're involved in, this is where you're meant to be. This is, you are enacting the purpose that Allah has placed in your heart. And this is an intentional process. It's not just haphazard. You're meant to care about this and you're meant to be involved in this process. It's purposeful. So just kind of like wrapping up some of the more cognitive or thinking-based ways of dealing with the situation, I want to also touch on some practical skills around navigating some of the intense moments that may come about when dealing with the high intensity moments that just may happen as a result of being a part of these movements and while you're advocating in this way. The most important thing that I want to press upon you is as much as possible to be a part. So remember that togetherness that I mentioned. Remember that kind of like team camaraderie vibe that I was sharing earlier. The most important piece that I would like to press upon you is to be prepared together. So because we know that these high intensity moments may come about, they're unpredictable, it's not possible to know exactly when what is going to happen. It's really important to have a plan and be prepared in advance in terms of what your plans are, what your reaction is going to be when that high intensity moment happens, because when the high intensity moment happens, your brain is not going to be functioning as well as it does when it is not in a high intensity moment. So if you're able to, when you are in a more peaceful environment, when you're not actively threatened, if you're able to have a plan, a safety plan, a plan together with your comrades and the group that you're involved with, when it does happen, you can be a lot better prepared and have had planned for it well. So here are a few things to keep in mind. The first one is to just be really intentional about exactly what your capacity is in terms of how much exposure you can manage to these high intensity moments. Given a wide variety of different things, it could be related to legal status. It could be related to your physical capability. It could be related to your family's well-being. I mean, there are a lot of different things that people have to grapple with. It's important to be intentional in advance about the extent to which you are able to be directly engaged with in these moments versus not, and just have a plan around that. Now, let's say you are a person who knows that you are choosing to say that if these types of high intense moments happen, I am capable. I have the capacity to be able to navigate it. Then it's important to, again, it's important to distinguish between whether you're a person who is well equipped to be directly involved with these high intense interactions, or are you a person who's better equipped to be supportive in the background and do something in the background? If now, let's say you are a person who chooses to potentially be engaged in these high intense moments, and you're also a person who potentially chooses to be the person who's directly a part of managing or navigating a highly intense moment. Again, it's important to be on the same page with your team in choosing who is the most well-equipped, well-regulated, seasoned person to engage in the direct interaction with the person who may be inflicting the situation, with the people who may be doing it, and what is your group strategy about navigating that situation? Is it to de-escalate? Is it to, what is your group strategy? The takeaway from all of this decision tree is to have a plan in advance when you are in a non-intense moment around what is going to be the group strategy together around managing that moment, so that in a harmonious way, if a highly intense moment happens, folks kind of know where they're situated, where they're at, and what their roles are, and what their roles are not. That helps the group function better towards the goals that they may have. And I think lastly, it's also important to know just some of the resources that you can tap into for mental health services or psychological support. Given that, again, like to the extent that you are involved, so it may be that you are very directly involved with some of these highly intense moments, or it may be that you are more like on the back end of things. There are a few resources that I want to encourage you to look into that may be helpful and supportive of how you navigate this current situation. So the first one is the Muslim Mental Health Initiative. That's university-based services out of the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab at Stanford. The second one is there's a mental health guide that Maristan has on their website. And I hope folks can put these, to put the links on here. And so the mental health guide is particularly in response to managing your psychological well-being in light of the genocide that Israel is committing in Palestine, and navigating the mental health components of that for you. And the last one is a recording of the previous healing circle that Maristan held for Palestine, and just kind of watching through that and listening to the strategies that were shared there, and that can also be helpful. So inshallah, I'm gonna I think give it back to Zahra. Hopefully, if her connection is working better, we can hear her thoughts.
Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. I'm just not going to move so that the reception doesn't fade. Thank you so much, Dr. Zainab, for everything you offered, as well as for stepping in with my terrible connection. So I'm back, and the thing I wanted to make sure to touch on is I addressed before I fell off, or I got kicked off because of the Wi-Fi, or the Wi-Fi took me off, that you have a right to speak, you have a right to protest. You don't necessarily have a right to sleep or to camp. And I don't say that to deter you. I say it so that you understand that civil disobedience, as it exists as an American hobby, pastime, practice, and tradition, is not like, every time we think about how people advocated for justice, they didn't do it by following the law. When I was younger, when I was in college, I would say that some laws were meant to be broken. And this is that moment. Now, just because you do all of those things doesn't mean that your university should be able to brutalize you, discriminate against you, or send the police out to beat you. And so I want to be clear that those things are civil rights violations, even if someone is breaking the law by sleeping in a tent or staying out in an encampment. And should you experience those things, and of course we pray for your protection, I want you to know about a couple of resources that will come in handy for something else I'll talk about as well. First and foremost, of course, CAIR, we're the nation's largest Muslim civil rights organization with over 30 offices across the country, and legal teams that have been working around the clock to protect our community and our allies who have been advocating against Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism. In addition to us, you've got groups like the National Lawyers Guild, who specialize in protecting the legal rights of protesters. You have Palestine Legal, which has been really, really integral for more than a decade now, in specifically focusing on your advocacy for Palestine and your ability to do that. And then there are going to be local legal groups, Muslim bar associations, and others. They all exist as a resource for you. What we've seen right now has been an overwhelming outpouring of lawyers, law students, and legal workers who are so inspired by the students who are protesting, who are speaking out, who are camping, who are wearing their keffiyehs, that they're just lining up to help as much as they can. So you have a right to speak, you have a right to protest, you have a right to distribute materials. And this is a moment where, though I'm not going to urge you to break the law, I will say, and I can't do that as a licensed attorney, but I will say that this is a moment where people are really demonstrating courage by strategically pushing the boundaries of certain laws in order to make a point. And if something happens to you in that process, or you have questions as you go into it, know that you can call on any of us. The last thing I wanted to say is that there is this, like, early on in the protest movement against the Israeli genocide in Gaza, there was a lot of effort to distinguish between, like, what is a safe protest, one where you won't get arrested, versus one where you will risk arrest. And unfortunately, what's happened is that universities and local law enforcement have been arresting people who were not breaking any rules, have been putting out disciplinary notices against people who were not even at protests. And it's unfortunately the case that the university administrators, local police, and pro-Israel groups have decided that there are frankly no rules that they will abide by. And so if you have questions before you start a protest, before you go to a protest, I want to urge you to be overly cautious in so much as your diligence early on will protect you, right? I was telling someone earlier, I've had the honor of being arrested a couple of times, engaging in civil disobedience on various issues. And when I was arrested, I knew that I was risking arrest. I had a bail plan. I had an emergency contact. Right now, people are going to campus and getting arrested, right? Just a couple of arrested or brutalized a couple of days ago. We saw the San Diego police use pepper spray on Imam Taha. We've seen police liaisons, the last people that are supposed to be arrested, getting arrested. And so I want to urge you to reach out and get that advice from your local CAIR office, your local Palestine legal folks. The National Lawyers Guild, again, is a great resource. Go into these situations fully prepared, understanding that just as pro-Israel advocates in Israel have not held back on violence and repression targeting Palestinians, we're seeing that same vitriol here. And so better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. The last thing I'll touch on really quickly is this question about doxing, right? So a lot of people have talked about doxing. Some of you may have the honor of being on Canary Mission. For those of you who are not yet married, there is a joke that it is probably the best Muslim matrimonial website out there, because you can quickly vet the politics of the people that you are swiping right or left on Canary Mission. But jokes aside, we know that for many people, the concern about doxing is very real. Either you have an immigration issue in your background, or you want to go work in a sector where maybe pro-Palestine advocacy will not be celebrated, or you're worried about your family's safety. The hard thing is that once somebody is doxed, it is often very challenging to, as a judge once said in a different matter entirely, unring the bell. And so if you're going out, and hopefully all of you are, I want to urge you to think cautiously about how to prevent doxing, right? I don't want you to be afraid of it. Alhamdulillah, my first time being doxed was in 2006, and I chose a career path where the more they dox me, the more my work grows. That may not be the case for you. It may be, but it may not be the case for you. And so approach this with caution. I just spoke to a student today who was like, oh, no, like they won't dox me. And my response was, here's the thing. You don't know who they will dox or when they will dox. And so if you're out speaking somewhere and you don't want to take that risk, wear a mask. If you are posting on social media and you don't want to take that risk, two things. One, of course, you never say or do anything that you wouldn't want on the front page of the New York Times, but maybe you don't need to use your full name. Maybe you don't need to post pictures of your siblings who are under 18. Or any identifying details about your house or family. Unfortunately, we have seen that this is one other way that pro-Israel groups are attempting to target Palestinian and Palestinian solidarity voices. I'm going to put a picture of you on the side of a truck, as they did with Dr. Hatem Bazian, mashallah, and drove it around town, scaring his name. Or I'm going to put you on Canary Mission, or I'm going to put you on Stop Anti-Semitism on Twitter. So I want you to be preventative about this. Ultimately, I tell students, look, like, you can make the decision that you don't care about the risk, or that you can withstand the risk. If you make that decision, that's fine, but there is no way to unring that bell. And so if your face ends up somewhere you didn't want it, it's really, really hard to get it down. And as a result, we benefit from being so close in time to COVID, you can wear a mask and people don't think anything about it. So wear a mask, use your keffiyeh to cover your face, think about where you disclose personal details. And a lot of what I've told you is that the law is not helpful. And in fact, you have to think about how to protect yourself despite the fact that the law will be used to harm you, or that the law won't protect you in the case of doxing. And so that's a really heavy way to end. And so instead of doing that, I'll come back to where I started, which is that they thought they could bury us. They didn't know that we were seeds. Pro-Israel groups and university administrators have tried to quash the pro-Palestine movement for over 20 years, and more so in the last several months than ever before. And what is terrifying them right now is the very thing that I think should inspire all of us, which is that no matter what they do, tens of thousands of students continue to come out, continue to risk their academic careers, continue to risk their professional careers, and continue to risk their physical safety, because they know, as Dr. Zainab said, that we should be grateful for being born in this moment and having the opportunity to put all of our privilege to good work, to say, yes, I have the right to speak and I have the ability to walk and I know how to pitch a tent and I am persistent. And so we will together keep fighting for a free Palestine from the river to the sea.
Thank you, Zahra. We do have some folks with some questions. I think we saw a hand raised. Did anyone want to talk about their question before I take the Q&A chat? Okay. And then also on the screen, you'll see some resources that Maristan is sharing in terms of you can use after this presentation, and also on msanational.com/Palestine. There's some advocacy tools and resources that students can use as well. So I'll move over to the Q&A chat box. I think this question is best for Dr. Zainab. So the question is, I am a Palestinian Christian university administrator working at a major national security focused university. I'm experiencing a great deal of survivor's guilt on top of the guilt for working for a university that is heavily tied to Israel. I support refugee students on campus as part of my role, but I don't feel like it's enough to justify staying in my role. I'm involved in SJP, but once again, it feels like it's not enough. I feel like I'm betraying my Palestinian brothers and sisters by working here, paying US taxes, etc. How do you know if existing as a Palestinian in these Zionist spaces as a form of resistance outweighs the fact that you're working for a Zionist institution? Do you know of any free therapy options for non-Muslim Palestinians?
I guess let me first address the second part of the question. I think the second part of the question may be actually better suited for Dr. Awad in terms of whether access to the Maristan resources are specific to, because she's asking specifically about free therapy options for non-Muslim Palestinians. So I think I know the answer to that, but just so that I'm very clear and sure about the answer that I'm giving, I'm going to ask Dr. Awad to corroborate whether Maristan services whether she could qualify for Maristan services. So let's kind of talk about the guilt aspect of things. The first thing that I would like to emphasize is the prevalence and also the functionality of feeling guilt. So the fact that we can feel guilt during these moments and I think you described it actually very eloquently, like it's about the institution that you're involved in now, but it's also even at a more structural level, like governmentally, and the society that we belong in, and the state funding and the federal fund, like all of that are these different like complex levels of that could be sources of guilt for us. So the first thing that I want to emphasize and press upon you is when we feel guilt, guilt can be a positive emotion because it's meant to tell us something. It's our moral core trying to send an alarm. It's trying to give us some indication that something is out of balance. Whatever way we have understood the world to be, whatever way like balance looks like, this emotion is meant to be like an alarming. The function of this emotion is that it's meant to raise an alarm in us. So the first thing that I want to emphasize is sometimes guilt can lead to a lot of other emotions that are not as useful or healthy for us to feel. Let's try to be, and I'm going to encourage this person to be intentional about using the guilt that she's experiencing or she or he, I'm not sure if who the person is, but that they're experiencing, to intentionally move it towards an action-oriented behavioral space that is doing good, that is moving us closer to the goals that we have rather than farther away. Because a lot of times it happens all the time where the guilt that we feel because it consumes us or because it turns into this vicious cycle, it actually counterproductively moves us farther away from the goal that was initially making us feel the guilt. That's the first one. The second piece of this is I obviously can't, tell you one way or the other whether to stay in this position or not to stay, and you would be the best judge of knowing whether, how the balance is happening. What I'm hearing from what you have written is that you are looking for that balance. Like there are some pros to staying in this institution, using your privileges to be able to enact change from the inside, and you're kind of looking at the pros of that. And then you're also trying to balance that with, well, is it more productive or is it more effective if I do quit this position and then potentially get involved elsewhere and things of that nature. I think that the thing that I obviously can't say which one of those choices is best, but what I would like to remind you is that we're meant to be making choices in life. And as long as the choice that you are making is an intentional choice it requires some sitting with yourself or potentially with a therapist and just kind of like thinking through the reasoning behind either one of the decisions. As long as you are honest with yourself about the pros and cons of each and the amount of good based off of your own values that you're able to do based off of either one of the choices, and you intentionally choose that choice to say, for this particular reason, then I would say run with it. Whichever choice it is that you are making, then be committed to that choice, focus on that. Don't allow the guilt did its job. It brought you into this moment where you kind of like looked at the pros and cons. You chose one of the courses of action, and then time to go, time to act, time to move forward, time to not get distracted by some of the holes that guilt can place upon you. As long as you are enacting the things that you care about and towards the movement towards the goals that you do care about.
Thank you, Dr. Zainab. We have someone who has raised their hand. Let me double check. Sister Zainab, I think you have your hand raised, so we'll go ahead and unmute you. Please feel free to ask your question. Okay, maybe there's not a question there. Well, we are at time, so if you guys have any other questions that come up, please feel free to contact either Maristan or MSA National. and that will close out inshallah. That's from our speakers. Before we close out.
Nimra, we couldn't make out
Anyone
the
from
very last
Maristan
things that you were saying. We couldn't really hear you.
Okay, there was a question that was asked if this recording will be available.
I think
Can you hear me okay now?
try it again. Can you try?
Sorry. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead. If you get cut off again,
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay, sorry. No, there was just one question that was asked about if this recording will be available after. Can someone from Maristan maybe answer that question? So in the chat, it says that it will be recorded and posted on our website and YouTube channel, inshallah. Okay, I think with that, we can close out, inshallah. Jazakallah for everyone for joining in. Again, please reach out to either Maristan or MSA National if you have any questions. All right, assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair. Like,